My name is Daniel Price, and I used to think shadows were harmless. But the night the light above my desk began to flicker, I realized something horrifying. Those shadows weren't mine anymore. They belonged to something else. And every time the light blinked, it stepped closer. The light above my desk flickered for the first time on a Tuesday night, and at first, I didn't even look up. I thought it was nothing, just an old bulb struggling against weak wiring, the kind of thing that happened in this building all the time. I had lived here for almost a year, and I was used to little problems, like the rattling pipes or the draft that slipped under the windows at night. But this was different. The flicker wasn't just a simple blink of light. It was sharp, too fast, and yet somehow too long. As if the room had been cut into two pieces, one of light and one of darkness, and I had been pulled briefly into the darker half. When the bulb steadied again, the shadows on my walls stretched too far before shrinking back. My eyes followed the jagged lines, my mind trying to convince me that everything looked normal. But something about the way the shadows bent didn't feel right. They moved as if they weren't tied to the furniture or objects that created them. I rubbed my eyes and leaned closer to my laptop screen, forcing myself to focus on the work in front of me. It was easier to blame my tired brain than to admit that the room felt different. Minutes turned into hours, the only sounds the tapping of my keyboard and the hum of the bulb above me. Then, without warning, the light blinked again. The darkness this time felt thicker, heavier, pressing down on me like invisible weight. In that single second, something shifted in the room. I could feel it in my chest, a pressure like I was being watched. When the light returned, I glanced toward the far wall, and my heart skipped. The chair I had left neatly tucked against the wall was angled slightly toward me. I froze. My pulse quickened as I tried to remember if I had moved it earlier, but I couldn't think straight. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the eye, a shadow making it look wrong. I turned back to my screen, but the weight of that corner pressed against the back of my skull. The thought that someone or something had shifted while the light was gone kept pulsing in my head like a drumbeat. The bulb buzzed faintly like an insect trapped in glass. I stared at it, daring it to flicker again, desperate to prove to myself that I was imagining everything. But when the room plunged into darkness for a third time, I had the terrible feeling that I wasn't imagining anything. The dark was so complete that it didn't feel like night. It felt like a void, as though the room had been swallowed whole. I could hear my breath echo in the silence, louder than it should have been. When the light came back, my skin crawled with the certainty that something had been closer. I sat there until the early hours of morning, my fingers stiff on the keys, too afraid to move, too afraid to turn around fully. Every time the bulb flickered, my stomach dropped. The shadows swayed unnaturally, like living things crawling over the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness wasn't empty, that something existed inside those quick, stolen moments when the light failed. Something that didn't belong here. I tried to go to bed, but lying in the dark was worse. I left the lamp on, its dim glow stretching weakly across the room. I told myself the light would protect me, but I could feel the lie the moment the bulb blinked. The instant the shadows broke apart, I knew I wasn't safe. I kept my eyes open, burning with exhaustion, because I was terrified of what would happen if I let them close. The hours dragged. At one point I thought I heard the faintest shuffle near my bed, but when I sat up, nothing moved. The lamp flickered again, and I gasped. For a split second, the shadows formed a shape. It wasn't random. It wasn't a trick. It was standing directly beside me. I could see the outline of shoulders, a head tilted toward me, as if it had been leaning close the whole time, waiting for me to notice. When the light steadied, there was nothing there, just empty air and the sound of my racing heartbeat. But I couldn't unsee it. The shape burned into my mind, sharper and more real than any nightmare. I lay frozen, too afraid to move, my body trembling under the thin blanket. The flicker returned, slower this time, deliberate, almost cruel, and in the heartbeat of darkness that followed, I knew without doubt that whatever stood in my room had stepped closer. I didn't sleep that night. My body wanted to, but my mind wouldn't let me. Every time my eyelids drooped, the lamp beside me buzzed and I jolted awake, terrified that if I let go for even a second, the darkness would take more than just my comfort. Morning light finally poured through the curtains, weak and gray, but still, it was enough to calm me. The shadows shrank back into their places, and for a few hours, I almost convinced myself it had all been a dream. Daylight gave me courage. I left the house, desperate for normalcy, and walked through the streets with my eyes fixed on the sunlit sidewalks. Nothing flickered out here. No strange shapes in the corners, no thick silence pressing against my chest. I felt foolish for letting fear control me. By the time I returned home, I had decided the problem wasn't the house, but me. Lack of sleep, too much stress, too much imagination. Still, I wasn't careless. I stopped at a store on the way back and bought new light bulbs, stronger, brighter ones that promised long-lasting on the box. The idea that fresh light could keep the shadows in check felt comforting, almost like carrying a weapon. That night I replaced the bulb above my bed, twisting it carefully into place, and when it glowed steady and strong, I let out a shaky laugh. The harsh white light filled the room, every corner clear and harmless. My chair sat neatly against the wall where it belonged. The shadows were thin, ordinary. For the first time in days, I felt a fragile relief. I got into bed, still uneasy but more hopeful than I had been. The light hummed gently, steady and loyal. I stared up at it until my eyelids grew heavy and slowly exhaustion began to win. But just as my body slipped toward rest, it happened again. The bulb blinked, just once. Quick, sharp, merciless. In that sliver of darkness, I saw it. Not a vague shape this time, not a trick of my tired mind. It stood at the foot of my bed, as solid as anything else in the room. Broad shoulders, its head tilted as though examining me. I sucked in a breath so sharp it hurt, but before I could move, the light steadied. The figure was gone. The air, though, remained thick, charged, as if it had left behind something invisible but alive. I couldn't pretend anymore. The new bulb hadn't changed anything. The flicker wasn't about electricity. It wasn't about faulty wires. It was something else. Something that didn't care about how bright or strong the light was. It lived in that space between light and dark, in the heartbeat of absence. And every time it returned, it was closer. Panic drove me to turn on every single lamp in the house. The living room, the kitchen, the bathroom. I flooded the apartment with light until there wasn't a shadow left to hide in. Only then did I feel a fragile shield of safety wrap around me. I tried to breathe, tried to calm the shivering in my chest. But when I walked past the hallway mirror, I froze. My reflection stared back, pale and tired, but something about it was wrong. It didn't move exactly when I did. There was a delay, a half-second lag that made my stomach drop. I lifted my hand slowly, watching in horror as the reflection's hand rose slightly after mine, not with mine. My throat tightened, too dry to swallow. I leaned closer, telling myself it was a trick, that I was imagining it. But as I stared, my reflection blinked. I hadn't. My eyes remained wide and stinging with fear. But in the mirror, the other me closed its eyes slowly, deliberately, and opened them again with a faint glimmer that didn't belong to me. I stumbled back, knocking into the wall, but the reflection stayed where it was, watching with a faint curve at the corner of its mouth. Almost like a smile. My skin prickled as though invisible fingers brushed against it, and I felt the same cold buzz from the flicker in the air around me. I tore the sheet from my bed and threw it over the mirror, covering it completely. I couldn't stand to see it anymore, but even hidden, I could still feel it staring. That night, when I returned to my bedroom and lay under the too bright light, I understood something I hadn't before. The flicker wasn't random, it wasn't broken wiring, it was deliberate, and whatever watched me through the dark was no longer content to stay in the shadows. It wanted to be me. I stopped trusting mirrors after that night, even with a sheet draped over the hallway glass. I could feel the reflection waiting behind it, breathing when I wasn't, blinking when I didn't. I avoided that hallway as much as possible, slipping past with my eyes fixed firmly on the floor. But even without mirrors, I could sense it watching me. The flicker followed me everywhere now. It wasn't just my apartment anymore. The first time I noticed it outside, I had been walking home from the store. The street lights above hummed softly in the cool air, glowing orange against the night. Then, without warning, one overhead sputtered, dimmed, and came back. My stomach dropped as if I had been pulled backward. I felt it then, the same heavy pressure that filled my apartment whenever the bulb blinked. My chest tightened, and the air seemed to thicken until breathing became work. I told myself to keep walking, not to look, not to give in. But curiosity and fear worked together like cruel hands pulling my head up. For a fraction of a second, when the streetlight stuttered again, I saw something wrong in the corner of my eye. A shape, too tall, too still, standing at the far end of the sidewalk. When the light steadied, there was nothing there but empty pavement. The flicker didn't stop, it became part of my days, infecting everything. At work, the fluorescent bulbs buzzed above me and dimmed, each blink carrying that same electric dread. My computer monitor froze once, then spat static across the screen, just for a moment. Buried in the noise, I saw a face. My own face, but stretched too wide. The eyes empty pits, the mouth curled into a grin I couldn't make. My stomach lurched so violently that I almost vomited at my desk. No one else seemed to notice. People walked under flickering lights without a second glance. No one stopped at the shadows. No one stared at screens. It was only me. I was the only one seeing it. Or maybe, I thought, I was the only one being watched. I started to lose track of sleep. Nights blurred into mornings. Mornings bled into nights. My body caught in an endless cycle of fear and exhaustion. The flicker seeped into my thoughts, cracking my sense of reality. I couldn't ignore the feeling that my shadow no longer belonged to me. One night, while brushing my teeth, I caught it in the corner of my eye. My shadow on the wall didn't move in rhythm with my body. It lagged, shuddered, as though fighting to keep up. I froze, toothbrush clutched in my hand, and stared at it. My arm was still, but the shadow twitched, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Then, before I could breathe, it stilled, perfectly matching me once again. My knees almost gave out, but I forced myself to walk away, pretending I hadn't seen. Pretending made it easier, even as the truth wrapped itself tighter around me. That night I sat in the living room, every lamp burning, gripping a flashlight like it was a weapon. The bulb above hummed, steady, but I could feel it wavering, the way a heartbeat stutters before stopping. My eyes kept darting to the door, to the corners, to the places the light didn't reach fully, and then it happened. The bulb flickered. Not quick, not sharp like before. This time, the darkness held. 1 second, 2, 3, long enough for the air to shift, for the silence to break with the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, dragging across the floor toward me. The light snapped back. My eyes shot to the front door and I froze. The lock I had turned with my own hands earlier was undone. The door stood wide open, letting in the night air. My throat tightened, panic clawing at my chest as my gaze dropped to the floor. Dirt smeared the tiles in front of the door, dark and wet as though freshly pulled from the earth. Footprints, bare human-shaped footprints. They trailed inside, one after the other, leading directly into my home. My heart pounded as I traced the trail, each print darker than the last. They didn't stop at the door. They didn't linger in the hallway. They came straight into the living room. And the last one rested inches away from where I sat. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body sat frozen in the chair, every muscle locked as though my bones had turned to stone. The last footprint was so close I swore I could feel the dampness of the dirt seeping into the floor beneath my feet. My eyes darted upward, scanning the room, but nothing waited there, nothing visible. The light above hummed and wavered, threatening to betray me again, and I held my breath, terrified of what I might see if it flickered. Minutes passed like hours. My chest burned from holding back each shallow inhale, listening for sounds beyond the blood rushing in my ears. I told myself that if I stayed perfectly still, maybe it wouldn't notice me. Maybe it would think I hadn't noticed it. But deep down, I already knew that whatever had entered through that open door had come here for me. When I finally forced myself to rise, my legs shook so badly I thought they might collapse. I stumbled toward the door, careful not to look down at the prints, though I could feel them tugging at my attention like invisible hooks. I slammed the door shut and threw the lock, twisting it until my fingers ached, but the lock meant nothing now. It had already come inside. The rest of the night dragged on in a blur of panic. I sat awake on the couch, clutching the flashlight, its beam sweeping over every corner of the room. Nothing moved, but I could feel it lingering in the edges of my vision, waiting for me to blink. Each time the light above buzzed louder, my chest seized with dread, terrified that the dark would swallow me again. When the morning sun finally pushed through the curtains, I felt no relief. I was too drained, my body hollowed out by fear. The footprints were still there, faint now, as though they were sinking deeper into the floorboards rather than fading. I couldn't look at them for long without my vision blurring, as if the prints themselves carried some kind of pull. By the second night, the flicker changed. It wasn't just the bulbs or the screens. It was inside me. I realized it when I rubbed at my eyes, desperate to stay awake. Every time I blinked, I risked slipping into that same suffocating dark. And in that fraction of a second, I saw it my double. It stood only feet away, clearer now, no longer a blur of shadow. It had my shape, my height, my face, but the eyes. The eyes weren't mine. They were pits of shifting static, buzzing faintly like a broken signal. I tried to stop blinking. I forced my eyes wide, stretched so far they burned, the whites turning raw and red. I cried without meaning to, tears streaming down from the strain. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, but I kept them open as long as I could, until exhaustion betrayed me, until they closed on their own. That blink lasted longer than any before, long enough for me to feel something touch me. Cold fingers brushed my arm, a faint sting like electricity rippling across my skin. My eyes shot open and I gasped, clawing at my arm where it had touched me. My skin rippled, a strange shimmer-like heat rising off asphalt, and for a moment it looked like my flesh itself had flickered. I stumbled into the bathroom, flipping on every light, and stared at my reflection. The sheet still hung over the hallway mirror, but here I had no choice but to look. My reflection stared back, pale, trembling, with red swollen eyes. For a moment, it was me, and then, it wasn't. The reflection leaned closer, even though I hadn't moved. Its lips curled into that wide, impossible grin. My chest clenched, my breath frozen. I slapped the light switch off in panic, plunging the room into black. And that was the worst mistake I could have made. Because in that instant of darkness, I heard it whispering. Not words I could understand, but static flooding my head, buzzing against my skull. My knees buckled and I pressed my palms against my ears, but the sound was inside me, not outside. When I fumbled the light back on, the reflection was gone, but something else remained. Thin cracks had spread across the bathroom mirror, jagged lines that hadn't been there before, splitting my reflection into broken pieces. And behind those cracks, just faintly, I could still see eyes glowing with static, watching, waiting. That night, the light bulb in my bedroom didn't flicker. It shattered. The glass rained down around me, and for the first time, I was left in complete darkness with no protection at all. And in that suffocating black, the static whispered louder, as if it was already inside my head. When I woke, I wasn't in my bed anymore. The last thing I remembered was the bulb shattering above me, the explosion of glass, and the crushing black that followed. Now I sat upright in a chair, stiff and cold, in a place I had never seen before. The walls pulsed faintly, like living flesh breathing around me, their surface slick with a faint shimmer that caught the glow of a single bulb swinging overhead. The chair beneath me was hard, its edges digging into my skin as if to remind me I couldn't escape. The bulb buzzed. Its glow spilled weakly across the room, revealing rows of other chairs stretching into the distance. My stomach turned when I saw they weren't empty. People sat slumped in them, heads bowed, arms limp at their sides. Their skin looked gray, stretched thin like paper, and their chests rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. I thought they were strangers until I noticed their faces. Every single one of them was me. Dozens of me, maybe hundreds, lined up in neat rows, unmoving, lifeless copies with static flickering faintly in their eyes. The sight hollowed me out. My breath caught and my vision blurred, but I couldn't look away. It wasn't just copies, it was me at different stages. Some looked younger, fresher, their skin tighter, their expressions softer. Others looked worse, their faces gaunt and sunken, their flesh decayed, their mouths hanging open as if they had been here for years. Each version was trapped, lifeless, waiting. I tried to stand, but my body wouldn't move. My arms twitched, but invisible restraints held me down. My legs felt heavy, unresponsive, like they no longer belonged to me. Panic swelled in my chest, my heartbeat pounding so violently I thought it would split me in two. The bulb above me buzzed louder, rattling in its socket, and I realized with a horrible certainty that it was about to flicker. When it did, the dark lasted longer than before, long enough for me to hear movement. Shuffling footsteps echoed across the strange room, coming closer, slow and steady. When the light returned, I wasn't alone anymore. Across the room stood another me, not slumped in a chair, not lifeless like the others. This one was upright, solid, alive, something close to it. It was perfect, but wrong. Its skin was smoother, healthier, its shoulders squared with a confidence I had never carried, and its eyes, they pulsed faintly with static, glowing in rhythm with the bulb above. It stared at me with a grin that stretched too wide across its face. A grin that wasn't mine. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but no sound left my throat. My mouth opened uselessly, as if the air had been stolen from me. The other me lifted a hand and waved slowly, mockingly, as if welcoming me. Then it began to walk forward, each step deliberate, echoing against the floor. The closer it came, the more the buzzing in my skull grew. Static filled my head, growing louder and louder, until I thought my brain would rupture. The bulb flickered again, and in that flash of dark, the other me wasn't across the room anymore. It was standing right beside me. Its face leaned close, grinning so wide its teeth looked sharp, its eyes burning with static. When the light returned, it straightened, towering over me. The rows of other versions of me began to stir. Slowly, their heads lifted, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. One by one they began to look at me, hundreds of gazes burning holes into my skin. I felt something tearing inside me, as if my body was splitting between worlds, between light and shadow. The other me reached down and pressed its hand against my chest. My heart skipped violently, the static roaring so loud it drowned out everything else. My vision blurred. The room flickered. The rows of versions of me stuttered in and out of focus. For a moment, I thought I saw my own body still sitting in the chair, pale and lifeless, as if something had already pulled me free. Then the light above shattered, plunging everything into total darkness. The static didn't fade this time. It consumed me, wrapping around me, pulling me apart. I couldn't feel my body anymore. I couldn't tell if I was breathing, if I was even alive. When the light returned, I was standing. No chair beneath me, no restraints. My arms moved easily, my legs steady beneath me. I looked down at my hands, and they were perfect. Smooth, strong, not trembling. I felt powerful, I felt whole. And then I realized what had happened. The rows of lifeless versions still sat in their chairs, heads bowed, but one chair was empty. My chair. Across the room, in the dark, I could still see movement. Something shifted, weak and trembling, thrashing against invisible bonds. My own pale face stared back at me, eyes wide with terror, mouth opening in a silent scream. It was me, the real me, still trapped in the chair, still fighting, still flickering. I raised my hand slowly, and the trapped me mimicked the motion a second later, lagging behind. My grin stretched across my face before I could stop it. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt something else. The bulb buzzed above, threatening to die again, and in that sound I realized something terrifying. I wasn't the one watching anymore. I was the one being watched.